welcome back to my channel. I feel like I am far too chipper to be filming this particular video, but who said trauma had to be boring? Today we're going to talk about low contact versus estrangement, what the differences are, and potentially how they can look for different people, how they can work for you, and what the pros and cons are, and sort of navigating them with your own family members. I feel like estrangement becomes especially prevalent when we're coming up to the holiday seasons, because there's going to be those big family gatherings, there's going to be more people that are going to be making the choice to become estranged, there are going to be more people that are making the choice to step back, become low contact. So hopefully this video can be really helpful and useful for everyone. Got me coffee. Okay, so at the risk of teaching people to suck eggs, let's look at the definition of estrangement versus the definition of low contact. Really simple. Estrangement is a complete breakdown of a relationship. So when people say to you that they are perhaps estranged from family members, more often than not, what they mean is they have no contact with them whatsoever. They are zero contact. And then with low contact, quite often it wouldn't even be a discussion. It might just be, oh, me and my mum are not close, or oh, me and so are not close, and it simply means that they maybe see each other on special occasions and speak to each other a couple of times a year. It's that low contact relationship where it's quite controlled. It's not that closeness that you maybe see in the media or that you think of when you think of a stereotypical parent-adult-child relationship. It is a relationship that perhaps has its trials and tribulations, and someone's set boundaries there to say, you know, this is how this is going to look for me. Both have pros and cons, and we're going to look at them together. With low contact relationships, I think that has one of the biggest benefits is that you still have that relationship, but often it's a case of somebody has stepped in and said, okay, look, I need to set this boundary in place. And perhaps it's because your parent has narcissistic tendencies, perhaps it's because they're emotionally immature, perhaps you feel aggrieved because you didn't have a childhood that you should have had, perhaps you feel that there was abuse, however that abuse may have looked, and you're not ready to completely cut ties with them, or perhaps you don't want to cut ties with them. All of those things are completely valid. With low contact, quite often it's a case of setting boundaries in place, knowing how you would like this relationship to look and what is realistic around that. If I'm honest, that's what I wanted with my mum. I would have liked to have been able to say, you move out of the annex, and if you're not aware of my story, then I will put a banner across here so that you can go and watch my story of how I became estranged, and that will hopefully clarify things. But for me, I would have loved to have said to her, I want you to move out of the annex so that we have that distance. And then in an ideal world, I would have been able to go and visit her with my kids, maybe once every couple of months, maybe once a month, depending on how she behaved and how we could be together, how our relationship was, because I felt that if we had that distance, then that toxicity that had completely enveloped our relationship would dissipate. I felt that we would be able to build something, and obviously that wasn't the way that things worked out for us, but my hope was that we would be able to have that low contact where we got to the point in our relationship where if I went out for the day and I hadn't let her know where I was, and I'm in my 30s, like if I hadn't let her know where I was or what time I would be returning home or who I was with, I would be getting angry phone calls that could be really nasty or just really abrupt of, Harriet, where are you? Hanging up. And that wasn't going to fly. So in order to avoid that situation, I felt like we could have had some boundaries in place, which we just didn't have within our relationship. I had a very enmeshed mother who saw me as an extension of herself. I think, if I'm honest, most people that I speak to who have a mother who is similar to mine, who I truly do believe is a narcissist, then it doesn't work when you try to go low contact, and they end up in a situation that I ended up in where in order to protect themselves it had to be a complete cut. It's very violent. Complete sort of cut off of the relationship, and that's where your estrangement comes in. Often with low contact, I think the difficulty with it is that it opens you up to receive more abuse, and it opens you up to receive more hurt. Whereas with estrangement, I feel like you can move along much faster in your healing journey. You can process things much better. With low contact, I think quite often there is always that door open a little bit. There is always that possibility that that parent will come in, will say something unkind, will remind you of some past trauma, and it makes it really difficult to move forwards when that is constantly happening. Another thing that crops up quite often when discussing estrangement and low contact is called a contact break. So it's something that's well known in psychology circles, and it is exactly what it sounds like, a break from having contact. I think if you don't want to cut a parent completely out of your life or a family member, but you feel that your relationship has become really engulfing and toxic and really damaging to your mental well-being, but you want to look at having a lower contact relationship where it doesn't look like it does in the movies, but you need that space at the moment to heal, then a contact break can be a really great way to navigate into a low contact relationship. Now, again, with low contact, it seems much more complicated than estrangement. Estrangement is quite literally what it sounds like. It is, you are estranged, that is the end of the relationship, job done. And whilst that comes with its own difficulties and its own complications, I think with low contact, there are lots of different ways in which you can be low contact, and none of them are incorrect. So there is also physical low contact, whereby you might see each other on holidays, you might phone calls or emails once a month, something like that, whatever that might look like for you. There is also emotional low contact, and that's becoming more and more prevalent and more discussed within psychology circles that deal with toxic parent-child relationships, especially now that we have more people who are forced into living with parents for longer, who are forced into relying on parents for support because of the financial crisis that the country is in. For emotional low contact, quite often that would look like being aware when your parent is goading you and not rising to it. And I know that sounds like, well, that's no different to what I would normally do, but it's a case of emotionally shutting yourself off from that parent. So you might see them, you might live with them, you might be around them, but that emotional side of things is cut off. You're not ringing them to let them know your good news. You're not telling them about the things that excite you, or if you are, you're telling them exactly in the same way that you might tell them, oh, I picked up beans at the supermarket. It's a very emotionally shut off way of doing things, and it works for some people, especially if they are in a situation where they either cannot become estranged or they can't become low contact, physical contact, whereby they are protecting themselves emotionally. They're aware of how this scenario may well play out, and they're either not going to rise to the goading, they're not going to take note of the spiteful comments if those are the way that your parent communicates, and they're not going to be upset if their parent completely overshadows their good news. Again, all completely valid. I think with emotional low contact, it's a term that's relatively new to me, and it sounds really hard. It sounds really hard to do. I'm not entirely sure if it's something that I would be particularly good at doing. I can be quite shut off emotionally anyway, but I think emotionally protecting yourself when you have so long wanted for that relationship with that parent to look a certain way or to be a certain way, it can be incredibly difficult to step back and say, okay, I am no longer investing in this relationship and I'm okay with that. With estrangement, it's worth noting that quite often estrangement can feel much more difficult, or no contact can feel a lot more difficult at the beginning. But as I said earlier, it can be easier to move forward, to heal, and to create the life that you want without the contact of your toxic family member. For me, that's certainly what I found initially. It was really difficult, really difficult. It just felt very hopeless, like I was the one who was to blame, and that I'd created this situation and I was at fault and I was alone, and it was really hard. But what I have found is that there has been a certain strength in sort of hitting that bottom and realizing that it wasn't me, it wasn't my fault, and I am in the position I'm in so I can move forward from that now. I can look backwards, learn from it, and move forward. There is some great information out there about low contact, and I'm gonna link that. I am gonna link that below. But what I can give you some advice on is becoming no contact with a parent. So my first thought is, when you do cut ties with them, be prepared for people not to support that decision, and be prepared for people that completely baffle you to stick their oar in and have their say and feel like they can comment on it. Because that's so common, and I'll be honest, it quite shocked me. I didn't expect for people that I've never really spoken to, or who I don't have a relationship with, to suddenly be sort of eyeballing me in the supermarket, or make a comment of, have you extended the olive branch yet to your mother? No. What? Who are you? I don't know you. And that, I found that really bizarre. And be prepared for family members who you perhaps thought would just get on with it, who've witnessed the abusive behaviour or the whatever it might be behaviour that has caused you to choose to go no contact. Be prepared for some family members to pick sides or act as flying monkeys and be coming to you and saying, you know, oh, can't you just contact? You have to simply move through it. And I'm going to do some content around how to respond to people and how to deal with people's negativity in another video. But I do feel really strongly that being mentally prepared for certain people not to take it well is a crucial part of going no contact, and not to allow those people to invade your boundaries and bully you into becoming contact again, because it's none of their business, and that helps absolutely no one. It just puts you back to square one. Another tip that I would give you is to block. I have my mum blocked on absolutely everything. She cannot contact me because I know for a fact if she could, I would either get abusive messages, I would get messages pretending nothing had happened, and I don't need either. So I think blocking somebody does not allow them access into your life, and that is a great way to protect yourself, and I mean across social medias, from your phone. You can't block the post. Unfortunately, we will still get birthday cards and things, and one of the questions that I get asked quite often is, how do we deal with getting birthday cards for the kids' birthdays or for my birthday? And I will show the children them, and then for me, I just bin them, but I will show the children them and give them the option of whether or not they want to pop it out. If they do, great, they can. If they want to bin it, we can bin it. But I make sure that they're aware that one has arrived. Is it awful? Yeah, it is. My birthday card last year was sort of a long, my mum's never been a card person. I haven't had a card off her in years. This was the first birthday card I'd had for years. And this was sort of a long card about how you miss your daughter, how she grows up to leave you. One of those long scripty poems that from anyone else's mum would have been beautiful and so sweet, but from mine was a threat, and quite obviously so, and was really uncomfortable. I think being aware that that's something that you can't block and that might arrive, and just popping it straight in the bin and moving on with your day is a great thing to do if you can, but blocking the access where you can is a huge tip that I cannot impress upon you enough, will make a big difference. Another huge tip, and I know I mention it all the time in this series, but therapy. Therapy has been life-changing for me. And not just for my experiences with my mum, but just for helping me to become a better, more well-rounded person. It's really hard, and I think one of the things I didn't expect, especially with therapy, is that the healing process is almost harder than going through the shit that you've been through. Going through it and dredging it all up. I know a lot of people are sort of like, oh, well, why would you dredge it up? Because you need to work through it and work through the trauma of it. And when you have, you come out the other side with such a better understanding of what you've experienced in life and how that shaped you as a person. And more importantly, how to not let it influence you as a person in a detrimental way, and how to take the positives from it, if there are any, and move forwards, because that's what it's all about. We can't sort of stay stuck in that position where we are hoping for a change in that relationship, because it's not coming. If you've got to the point where you are no contact, it ain't coming, and that's a really difficult realization to come to. So I think therapy is a huge thing, and we're really funny about it in the UK. I speak to American friends and they're like, oh yeah, everybody's in therapy. If you've not got a therapist, it's kind of weird. And in the UK, it's just so not a thing. It's not talked about enough. It's not widely accepted enough, and it should be. If you can access it, then BetterHelp is a great way to find a therapist. Going on the British Association of Therapists, I'm going to put that here because I can't remember the acronym for it. That is how I found my therapist. I have chosen to do people-led therapy, but there are loads of different types of therapy that when you read through them will suit you. And therapy is kind of transactional. If you don't get on with a therapist from the first meeting, that's perfectly normal. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. You just need a different therapist. Going back to the example of the birthday cards, another tip that I would give you is to absolutely not respond. If you haven't blocked them, or you've chosen not to block them for whatever reason, or they are perhaps using another method to get in touch with you, writing letters, using someone else's phone or email address, then not responding is a huge part of protecting yourself, because once you start responding, you're engaging and it just keeps going. The same principle as dealing with trolls online or anything like that. Not engaging with it is the best way to just make it go away. Another thing that I get asked quite often is, how did you have the conversation with your mum? And again, I've explained that in the video that I did about my story of estrangement, which I will link. But I think it's really, people have it in their heads that there's going to be some kind of big conversation where you sit down and you tell them that you're never going to speak to them again, and that very, very rarely happens. In fact, I don't know of it ever happening with any cases of anyone that I've spoken to. Invariably, there is a situation where after years and years and years of negative experiences and abuse, the person reaches a point where they just can't take it anymore. And there might be an event that is the straw that broke the camel's back, but that's not what caused the estrangement. And very rarely does that end with someone sitting down and saying, look, we're not going to speak anymore. One of the most common methods that I have that I've come across when I've spoken to people who have become estranged, and again, this wasn't my personal experience, but it is also recommended by psychologists and therapists, is to write a letter. If you feel that you want to explain your position, if you feel that you want to give your reasons for why you've chosen to become no contact with the person, then writing it out in a letter is possibly one of the most therapeutic ways to do that, because you can get it all out. I find quite often if I'm having a really bad week, I can email my therapist and she doesn't have to reply to me, but I'm just getting it out. And that can really help, especially if you feel that you've got things that you want to say and that you've got things that you want them to hear, but you know that they won't hear you face to face, or you know they'll try and manipulate a way around that face to face. I would almost always say write the letter, but it's up to you whether you send it or not, and that's the difference. I think writing things out can be really helpful and really therapeutic, but it's completely up to you whether you take that next step and actually send it to them or not. Sometimes sending it to them will do absolutely no good whatsoever, and it was just necessary for you to get it out there. Other times you might find that it will help make you feel better to be able to say, this is why I'm going no contact with you, and this is why I can't have a relationship with you. We're done. It's completely up to you. As with most things with estrangement, low contact, they're your relationships, and nobody can tell you how they should look or what you exactly should do in these situations. It's just what you feel the most comfortable with. As always, if you are going through this, or you know someone who is going through this, then please know that you are not alone. There is a community out there of people who have been through these experiences. It is just a very taboo topic that people don't talk about, and it absolutely deserves talking about. You haven't done anything wrong, and I send you all my love and healing wishes.